My name is Alfons Brüning. I am the director of the Institute of Eastern Christian Studies, and it is at this institute where we welcome, or already welcomed this month, our fellow, Dr. Helena Panczová, who has joined us from Trnava University in Slovakia. Helena is a specialist in biblical studies and patristics, and has previously spent research stays and also teaching in University of Helsinki and the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome, and received her education in Bratislava, if I'm not mistaken. She spent much time in translating text of the Septuagint into her native Slovakian. But another topic of her research is Gregory of Nyssa. And so now we have a three-layered interesting subject. The life of Moses in itself already is an interesting subject. The life of Moses in the perception of Gregory of Nyssa is perhaps even more interesting. And there is a subtitle to the book titles which she put on the which we put on the announcement, which reads on the path about the path towards perfection in virtue. So that's behind which he's going to tell us about the life of Moses in Gregory of Nyssa's redaction, and I'm happy to give you the floor. I'm sure we have an interesting afternoon ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, and now let's go to Gregory of Nyssa and his life of Moses. Saint Gregory of Nyssa lived in the 4th century, approximately 335, and he probably died after 394. And he belongs, together with his elder brother Basil the Great and his friend Gregory of Nazianzus, under the heading of Cappadocian Fathers, who played a prominent role in the shaping of ancient Christianity. Our Gregory is most famous for his theological input in Christological and Trinitarian debates of the second half of the 4th century, but his cultural influence is far greater. His works can be mechanically divided into 3 groups: dogmatic or theological, ascetic or spiritual, and exegetical. However, for Gregory, these are not separate disciplines, but rather 3 aspects of the same Christian teaching. Gregory's theology is well based in the Bible, and so is his theory of Christian spiritual life. And there is a strong connection between his theology and anthropology. The knowledge of God influences the spiritual striving, which is basically the process of the renewal of the image of God in humans, and this was made possible through God's incarnation. All this we must bear in mind when we try to understand the work Life of Moses. It is a work that discusses the events of the Exodus cycle as they are depicted in the biblical books of Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But it is difficult to pigeonhole it as exegetical and nothing else, because the subtitle the subtitle says that it is on the life of Moses, the lawgiver, or about the perfection in virtue. Gregory's aim is to present the life of virtue, of which Moses is the best example. So, the life of Moses can be labeled also as ascetic or spiritual work, because it gives a systematic outline for spiritual progress. And as Gregory's anthropology depends on his theology, or Christology, to be more precise, we encounter many passages speaking about the nature of God, and especially about the incarnation of God, when God became human and so knowable. The core of Christian theology is never far away in this work. So this complex bundle of meaning is the life of Moses. But despite its depth and complexity, the life of Moses is, in my opinion, rather reader-friendly. This is because of Gregory's skills as writer or author in general. He always takes just a small biblical episode, analyzes it, extracts its meaning relevant for his aim, and only then moves on. There is a more or less linear structure, and Gregory's thought is revealed gradually and smoothly. Now I'll try to present it. The Life of Moses consists of 2 books. The book 1 begins with an introduction to the whole work, where Gregory defines what perfection in virtue is. The problem is that virtue cannot be measured, cannot be given any boundaries or limits, and so it cannot be defined. It is because it is derived from God's infinity and illimitability. Gregory then gives his alternative definition. The perfection in virtue is unceasing progress towards God, the good. There is no end to this progress because God is infinite. This seems to be a daunting task, but it isn't so, because human nature, in the image of God, has this inborn capacity. It just must be developed. In addition to this, there is a detail, pleasingly interesting for a modern reader, that the process of spiritual development, according to Gregory, is the same for men and women. He says, human nature is divided into man and woman, and both are equally given the free choice of virtue or vice. Anyway, Gregory is aware that the idea of an unceasing progress in virtue towards God may be difficult, and so he gives a practical example, Moses, who did it. After this introduction, the book 1 continues with a simple retelling of the biblical events. The much longer book 2 then goes through the same biblical material, but now Gregory uses the tools of the allegorical exegesis to extract the spiritual meaning of the biblical narrative. That means the teaching that leads towards salvation. Moses, and later in the story also the people of Israel, are representatives of humanity on the way towards God. So now let us take a look at Gregory's exegesis. The first section speaks about the youth of Moses. The story begins with the drama surrounding the birth of Moses. The hero was born at the time when the Pharaoh ordered the newborn Hebrew boys to be killed, but girls to let live. This situation was traditionally interpreted as the schemes of the devil against the human soul, which consists of the rational male part and the irrational and sensual female part. The devil feels threatened by the development of rationality, which leads to the choice of virtue, while irrationality leads to vice. This misogynistic interpretation corresponded with the contemporary ideas about human psychology, and Gregory took it over without hesitation. But at the same time, he points out that the labeling male and female mustn't be taken literally, as it often was, unfortunately, as biological gender is a matter of chance, and so it is morally irrelevant. These labels speak about the structure of the human soul, which is the same in men and women. That was a revolutionary claim, but a very Christian one. There is the rational part, symbolically male, and the irrational part, symbolically female, in all of us. Everyone should strive that the baby boy Moses is born in their soul. Everyone should support rationality, that is the basis of virtue. This patriarchal symbolism of the good male and the evil female is, of course, a bit problematic nowadays, but it was a staple of the ancient culture. Unfortunately, I cannot go to the details about this male and female symbolism here, though it is highly interesting, especially how Gregory uses it. But I need to point out a few things. Although Gregory uses this patriarchal symbolism, he makes it clear that, first, it mustn't be applied to biological male and female, but figuratively to the psychology of both. And second, the consequence process of spiritual development is the same for men and women. This wasn't self-evident in antiquity. Many authors believed that woman was naturally incapable of virtue and she must somehow first become man, and only then the progress can be done. And there is also another interesting thing. In addition to this patriarchal symbolism, there is the matriarchal one as well, though it is at the background. The evil male, the pharaoh or the devil, plans destruction of life. This is prevented by several protective female figures, first the midwives and then the pharaoh's daughter. In ancient allegorical exegesis, these female figures were always interpreted positively as divine wisdom or education or the church. So this was a brief digression about how creatively Gregory uses the inherited symbolism. Now, let's continue with his exegesis in the life of Moses. The newborn baby boy, or rationality, is very vulnerable and needs protection. As this baby floats on the river Nile, he is rescued by the pharaoh's daughter. She becomes a mother to him, but she is still a foreigner. For Gregory, this woman represents the worldly education and its role in the life of a Christian. Obviously, this type of education supposes rationality and the choice of virtue, but only up to a point. It remains foreign, and there comes a moment when a Christian must leave it behind, just as Moses abandoned the Egyptian royal court and returned to his people. This return wasn't smooth. Moses witnessed a strife between two men, an Egyptian and a Hebrew, interfered in it and killed the Egyptian. This episode can be interpreted in a way analogous to the preceding one. The Egyptian represents the worldly education, which now clashes with our Christian values represented by the Hebrew. But the episode can also be applied to psychological realities. The Egyptian, who is an extended hand of the pharaoh, the devil, represents vice, which clashes with virtue, the rational attitude. In either case, Moses does the right thing and takes the right side. But although Moses did the right thing, he wasn't strong enough to face the consequences, and he ran away to the land of Madian. This welcoming foreign land is again an image of worldly education, but its role again has changed. When Moses arrived, he saw a group of wicked shepherds preventing others from access to water sources. This is interpreted as abuse of education. Moses interfered and restored justice. The final image of this section presents Moses as shepherd tending his sheep who obeyed him willingly. This is an image of mental peace which Moses achieved when he took control over irrational moves of his soul, which are traditionally called passions and are often represented by animals, irrational creatures. This is the first section of the life of Moses, covering the first 40 years of his life. It presents the development of rationality, which is the basis of virtue, from its birth by a person's free decision, when it is fragile and needs protection. Then it grows up and fights with the opposing power, and finally rules over irrationality, just as Moses had unquestioned authority over his flock of sheep. At the same time, we can observe the changing role of the profane education in the life and development of a Christian. At the beginning, it is life-saving. Later, it becomes ambiguous, but finally, it again becomes a positive force, on condition there is someone like Moses strong enough to prevent its abuse. Now, we go fast forward by 40 years of Moses' sojourn in Madian.
There we go.
Yeah, magic. Yeah. The next episode relates the theophany in the burning bush when Moses was called to deliver God's people from slavery in Egypt, and the great adventure of Exodus begins. When Moses was tending his sheep in Madian, God appeared to him in the form of the burning bush. In Gregory's version, this relatively small segment is very rich with ideas, and very important ones. He discusses 4 points here. First, the revelation of God in the burning bush is explained as a prefiguration of God's incarnation. This interpretation is based on the character of the image, which combines the heavenly fire representing Godhead and an earthly bush of thorns representing human body. This paradox, the bush was on fire, but the fire didn't consume it, expresses the incarnation and Virgin Mother at the same time. Second point that Gregory makes is this. The exposition of the biblical episode continues with another detail. Moses was ordered, take your sandals off your feet. These sandals, footwear made of skin, symbolize the same thing as the garment of skin, which according to the book of Genesis, God gave to Adam and Eve after the fall, and which, according to church fathers, has been covering the original image of God in humans ever since. So, when Moses was asked to get rid of this layer of dead skin, he was asked to renew the image of God in him. This exposition is substantially connected with the preceding image of the incarnation, for it is exactly the incarnation that makes the renewal of God's image in humans possible. According to Gregory's formulation, which represents universal Greek Christian spiritual tradition, God became human, the Word became incarnate, so that by becoming as we are, he might make us as he is. Those are Gregory's words. It is a variant of the widely spread teaching on theosis or divinization of humans. Then there is the third point, another detail of the episode. God reveals his name. I am the existing one, in the Septuagint, ego eimi hoon. Once again, this is of great importance for the idea of human divinization, which was just outlined, for it is the divine nature of Christ that makes the renewal of God's image in humans possible. As you probably know, Gregory of Nyssa actively participated in the theological debates against Arianism that challenged the teaching about the divinity of Christ. He wrote several treatises dealing with various theological aspects of this topic. The life of Moses isn't a polemical work. Theology isn't explained here systematically, but exactly because of that, we can see the importance of Christology for anthropology or human spiritual development. Then there is the final point. There is the well-known order given to Moses by God to liberate God's people suffering in Egypt. This is a difficult task, but God's incarnation guarantees its success. We may sum up this theophany. Gregory begins with an image of God's incarnation, the burning bush. Then he proceeds to the call of Moses, a model human being, to renew the image of God in him. As a support to this, Christ's divinity is pointed out. Then there is the second call of Moses to become a rescuer of Israel. What gives Moses power to fulfill this task is God's incarnation. When Moses received the call and the guarantees of success, he also got helpers, his foreign wife, a woman who again symbolizes worldly education, and elder brother Aaron, who represents the elder brother of humanity, the angels. And this team goes down to Egypt. Now we are in Egypt. The enslaved people suffer in slavery, crouched to the ground, working with mud. Moses came to them and spoke to them about freedom and reminded them about their dignity. Humans, unlike animals, have an erect stature and should look up to heaven. The suffering of the people of Israel represents the situation of humanity after the fall. Once noble, but now reduced to slavery and suffering under the tyranny of sin. The people heard the call to freedom, and the situation then escalated quickly. There followed the plagues of Egypt. This type of suffering that affected only Egyptians, while the Israelites were unaffected, Gregory explains as the general principle of evil, more specifically of passions. Passions, tapathe in Greek, are the same for all humans and have the potential to make people suffer. That's why they are called pathe in Greek. But they only affect those who choose them. This type of suffering, presented on the 9 plagues, is a matter of free choice and so can be avoided. The 10th plague, the death of the Egyptian firstborn, is special. If Egypt is understood as the land of passions, ruled by the devil, the Pharaoh, its firstborns are the first inclinations to sin, like anger that leads to murder or lust that leads to adultery. Those who want to proceed on the path of virtue must put these firstborns to death, not to cherish them like sweet babies. Then, after the Paschal supper, the people of Israel set on journey towards freedom. The Pharaoh, however, didn't want to give up his subjects and persecuted them with his army. The deliverance took place in the waters of the Red Sea, the symbol of the baptism. The people of God pass, the persecuting enemy drowns. This is an image of passions that should be put to death in the waters of baptism, not to be dragged along in the new life. Gregory's exegesis in this section about the events of Egypt is quite remarkable. There was a very strong interpretive tradition, and it is still alive in our liturgical celebration of Easter, you surely know it, that sees a parallel between the exodus of Israel from Egypt and the deliverance of humanity by Jesus Christ. In this hermeneutical key, Moses is a prefiguration of Christ. In Gregory's exegesis, however, Moses is an ordinary human, more advanced than the rest, but still just a man. He is a representative of the people, their speaker, a messenger, an intermediary, but he is not the one who delivers the people of God. He just brought them the call to freedom from God, and they listened and made the decision to follow. There is also another noteworthy thing. We are in the work that is called The Life of Moses. And it is indeed about Moses, but there are long passages like this one where Moses is at the background and the main character, the protagonist of the spiritual development, is Israel. Both Moses and Israel represent humanity responding to the call of God. So this section, it has a very strong main theme, the importance of human free choice on the way of deliverance from evil. Humans are gifted with free will. They can always choose between good and evil, and it depends only on them which way they will follow. This means that human deliverance or salvation is not a one-sided act of the divine savior, but requires a lot of hard work from humans. This is a general characteristic, again, of the Eastern Christian ethical approach, which was aimed against any form of predestination or determinism popular in the East, which has, of course, devastating consequences for any moral endeavor. So now let us proceed to the next section. The passage through the Red Sea signals the end of one life and beginning of another. This new life is a long journey to the Promised Land. Now begins the first part from the Red Sea to the mountain of Sinai. Gregory interprets it as gradual progress of new Christians in the teaching of the Church about the death and resurrection of Christ. The first episode, the bitter water in Mara, which became sweet when Moses threw a piece of wood in it, represents the difficulty and dullness of virtuous life. It is difficult and dull until the moment when the wood is added, and the wood symbolizes the cross with its mystery and all the teaching that is around it. Christ's death and resurrection has great significance for Christian spiritual development, though it takes time to grasp it. And the people of Israel, who are the main protagonists in this section again, are given a lot of time. They go through several stopping places. They receive miraculous water and nourishment from heaven, manna, and finally, they are ready to face the enemy. There is the battle with the Amalekites when Moses, their champion until now, steps aside and lets them fight for themselves. Moses, praying with his arms raised up, secured the people's victory. This, his attitude with the raised arms, symbolizes the crucifixion. The whole scene speaks about its importance on Christian spiritual battle. This is the basic meaning of this section of the journey and Gregory's idea about the spiritual development. There is one episode that must be mentioned separately because of its importance. It's manna, the spiritual bread that descended from heaven. It descended from heaven, but it was still real bread that satiated real physical hunger. This paradoxical union of the heavenly and the earthly indicates the mystery of God's incarnation, as we saw in the episode with the burning bush. Gregory points out that this is a very difficult part of Christian teaching, but at the same time, it is the very basis of any Christian moral endeavor. Gregory's exegesis of this section about the journey from the Red Sea to Sinai is, again, in my view, remarkable. Let me remind you, the life of Moses aims to be a treatise on the perfection of virtue. This means the renewal of the image of God in humans. The main battle consists in dealing with passions that got out of control in fallen humanity. But so far, and we are nearing the middle of the book, we haven't heard much about any practical spiritual battle. The first section about Moses' youth talk about the development of rationality, the prerequisite of virtue, and about the role of education in its strengthening. The next part about Egypt talk about free will and the necessity and possibility to make a free choice of the life of virtue. According to Christian teaching, rationality and free will are two characteristics of the image of God in humans that haven't been lost after the fall of humanity. They are inherent in every human being. So Gregory gave this general basis, and now we would finally expect some advice on how to deal with passions. But no such thing. Before that happens, Gregory considers inevitable that the liberating Christian teaching is really learned. This is a very important section where the people of Israel practically, they relax and study. They learn the basics of the Christian teaching. Such internalizing the tenets of Christianity is a prerequisite for any ascetic practice. So in this section, we had the second image of the incarnation. The first one was in the theophany of the burning bush. And in the following one, we will see more of that. Now we are at the Sinai, When Moses and the people of God arrived there, the people remained at the foothills, and Moses alone ascended. He entered the darkness and encountered God there. This darkness symbolizes the impossibility to know God with ordinary human means, sensory organs, and intellect. Ideas about God based on these lead to idolatry, which is strictly forbidden. Moses is given the tables of the law that consist of two parts. The one speaks about the right worship of God, which is only possible with the right knowledge of God. The other one speaks about the right moral conduct, which is also one way of worship of God. The two parts of commandments are interconnected. So the right knowledge of God is of crucial importance, and at the same time, we cannot know God. This looks difficult, but there is a solution. Moses was given a vision about the heavenly tabernacle, which was to be made on earth. According to Gregory, this is a prophecy about God's incarnation. The heavenly tabernacle, not made by hands and encompassing all things, is an image of the pre-existent Word. In the incarnation, this heavenly tabernacle or tent, skene, moved to the earth, and God dwelt among us, among his people. Eskenosen tabernacle, or built his tent, as the prologue of the Gospel according to John expressed it. The unknowable God can be known through Jesus Christ. This is the third image of the incarnation in the life of Moses, and the importance of this theme becomes clearer. While Moses was busy on the top of the mountain, the people remained at the foothills. What happened there is well known. They sinned with idolatry, with the golden calf they built. Moses was going down with the tables that were written on by God. At the noise of the idolatry, the tables fell out of his hands and broke. For Gregory, this is the story about the human fall and the following damage, breaking of human nature. The first tables created by God with his law written into them represent human nature before the fall. The idolatry of Israel is an image of the first sin. Then the tables fell to the ground and broke. That means the human nature was damaged. But this breaking, of course, wasn't the end of the story. Moses gathered the broken pieces, and together with some earth, he gave them to God, who used this mixed material and made a second set of tables. This is a representation of the human nature after the fall. It isn't a clear image of God anymore, but still contains it. The mixed material of the new tables, the earthly and the heavenly, also points to the combination of the divine and human nature in the incarnation. Here, the restoration of the broken humanity continues. Moses, descending to his people, is a prefiguration of Christ, divinity descending to humanity. He cradles in his arms the broken tables of human nature, which he took on himself, renewed and fully restored to the pristine perfection. This is indicated in the detail about the shining face of Moses, which parallels Christ's glory. It is a difficult section, and a more difficult one follows. In the next part, Gregory discusses a very short biblical episode about how Moses asked God to reveal his glory to him and how God responded. God responded that it is impossible to see God's face as Moses requested, but if he stands on the rock, it is possible to see God's back when he is passing. Gregory discusses what could be the meaning of these anthropomorphisms that obviously cannot have their literal sense. Gregory continues in his themes of the incomprehensibility of the infinite God on the one hand, and the possibility of knowing God through Jesus Christ the rock. And there is also another important theme that appears here. It's the constant progress in virtue. In the introduction to the whole work, Gregory already warned us that it is difficult to define virtue because it depends on God, who is infinite, and so virtue doesn't have any boundaries either. The perfection in virtue then means constant overstepping of what seems to be boundaries. In the debate about this episode, it is clearly manifested. This is the third theophany. Moses has already received 2, which is much more than any other human being. Why cannot he just sit back and relax? And he asks for another one. Gregory's answer is that Moses does it because this is the right attitude. A person should never stop on their way towards God, never stop on the path of virtue. This reflects the true nature of virtue. But it also reflects the very deep, true nature of humans who are created in the image of God and so have this capacity for infinity, for unceasing progress. In Greek, it is called epektasis, stretching over. This idea was later developed by many Greek authors. Another remarkable idea that appears here is love for God. Moses is capable of unceasing progress to God because he is motivated by love. We will hear more about this in the final part of the treatise, but first this idea appears here. Now, let's have a look at the following section where it is again about Israel. After the events at Sinai, the story continues with the discussion about episodes that happened during the long wandering of the people towards the Promised Land, as described in the biblical book of Numbers. Gregory interprets these events as various forms of human falls and the ways how to rise again and go on. I will go through them quickly. First, there is a rebellion of Aaron and Miriam, the siblings of Moses, against him. And this situation, according to Gregory, represents envy. Envy is the sin of siblings. It afflicts those who are the closest to virtue. Then there are the falls of the people who suffer from thirst and hunger, crave for the pots of meat of Egypt, and suffer from poisonous snakes in desert. On the surface, it looks like gluttony, but Gregory maintains that this is only a physical symptom of a spiritual thirst and hunger that can only be cured on the spiritual level. And then there is a rebellion about priesthood, which is caused by pride. There were some who demanded to be appointed priests and were denied. Pride is falsely seen as a somehow more spiritual vice when compared with the physical vices like gluttony before mentioned. But Gregory assures us that it isn't so. A vice is always a vice. That means bad. It doesn't make any difference whether someone falls by slipping or by tripping. You will get hurt either way. So in this section, 3 groups of people were presented that were prone to 3 different vices: envy, gluttony, and pride, according to their disposition. Finally, they overcome all these, and the people of Israel arrive to the royal road. They do not turn away either to the left or to the right. This is the way of virtue, which is, according to Aristotle, in the mean, between 2 extremes of vices. The vices are not bad in themselves, but they are bad because they are lacking the compensation of the opposite value. The virtue is a balanced attitude that combines the strengths of two opposites, like courage between cowardice and rashness, or wisdom between cleverness and simplicity. Gregory gives this vivid description of the royal road of virtue. It is like a narrow path formed on the high mountain ridge by its two precipitous sides. It is dangerous for a person walking it to turn away from its middle in either direction, because there is chasm on both sides awaiting the one who steps aside from the path. It is difficult to walk on it, but people of Israel at this stage of their development can do it and steadily proceed towards the promised land. This is the final image of the people in the life of Moses, and we can appreciate the progress they have made. When we first met them, they were crouched with their faces turned down to the ground. Then they heard the call to freedom, started the journey, and this is the result. Their back is straight again, their head is up, and so they are able to keep balance on the difficult road. The final part of the narrative speaks about the death of Moses, which is related at the end of the biblical book of Deuteronomy. Moses ascended a mountain and died there. The Septuagint text says, they buried him and no one knows his grave to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were dimmed, nor were his cheeks ruined. Gregory points out two significant features. Moses didn't show any signs of physical damage by old age. You can see the picture. Moses is 120 years old, but he looks very young. No beard. The second point, that there was no grave. Moses has lived a life of virtue faithfully. He has been a true servant of the Lord. His eyes didn't dim and his face wasn't corrupted because he lived in light and did deeds of incorruptibility. In this way, he has become a true image of God and fully conformed to the archetype. The absence of grave symbolically points to the same. The burial mound is earth, and the life of Moses has been free of earthly burdens, so he couldn't be covered with a grave, which is a heap of earth at the end, just as he couldn't wear sandals in the theophany in the burning bush. Moses was called servant of the Lord because he has followed him faithfully and become a true image of God. But he is also called a friend of God. This title comes from an episode when Moses on the Mount Sinai debated with God face to face as someone could do with a friend. For Gregory, these two titles are two sides of the same coin, two aspects of the same process. Being a friend of God, that means loving God, is the only way to become the servant of God. That means to conform to the archetype. In simple words, the path of virtue is difficult, and the only force that can keep someone steadily going on is love. Gregory further explains there are three types of virtuous people, each with their own motivation. The first type follow God because they are afraid of punishment. They are a bit like slaves. Others follow God on the difficult way in hope for some later compensation for their temporary hardships. They are a bit like merchants. And there is the third group who follow God out of love, and these are the only ones that will be called God's friends. This is the best way, and Gregory wishes us all to take it and become God's friends as Moses. Thank you for your attention.
For sobriety.
Gregory rather explains it that this is the way God taught the people to trust him.
Clarification, just went a little bit too quickly for me. Thank you very much for this inspiring lecture. I tried to follow it. You said there were 3 groups of people who follow God or try to walk this road to perfection. The second were the merchants, and the third were...
Yes, it is an idea that comes from Philo of Alexandria, and it is widely spread. It is also in Basil the Great and Gregory of Nyssa. There are people following God for various motivations. 3 main motivations. All of them are good. All of them make some progress. But if people follow God out of fear, they are a bit still with that slavish attitude. The second group that expects some compensation for their trouble, they are a bit like merchants, and the third one doesn't expect anything. They just love God and they make the best progress.
So there is some preference for the third.
Yes.
And you just mentioned there were 4 groups? No. Oh, I thought I knew that. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you say a bit more about the approach from Moses? If you want to write a treatise on the way to perfection, I can imagine that Moses it's huge logical choice in a way, but does Gregory explain why he chose Moses and not another biblical figure, or maybe a saint? Or
he chose Moses because Moses was the greatest in virtue. His whole life of progress is a paradigm of what progress and virtue should look like.
But he does not really explain. He takes that as a given that Moses' life was.
Yes, he does. And is it a problem? Is there anyone bigger than Moses?
No,
greater.
But I'm just interested in. I mean, we can take it as obvious and as a given, but he could respond to other writers, thinkers who took Moses as such a model, or
Yeah, you mean okay. No such thing.
Writing treatise also.
Philo of Alexandria wrote about Moses, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there close?
Yes and no. Gregory is very creative when it comes to his predecessors. He uses a lot of older material, but he twists it to fit his own purposes. So we find echoes of this, of that, and of many other things. But Gregory's version is his own. And this progress is a rather important thing. It isn't found in anyone else, not in Philo.
Oh,
Does he, in fact, represent Moses as the way we see, as a prefiguration of Christ?
No. That's one thing he doesn't do systematically. But the life of Moses speaks about the, let's say, adventures of Moses. But it also speaks about the adventures of Israel. There are 2 main characters, and Israel cannot be excluded. When Moses is the main protagonist, then he's the representative of humanity, no doubt about it. But when Israel is the main, the effective protagonist, then we find some small places where Moses, who isn't employed in the capacity of the main character, there Moses functions a bit like the prefiguration of Christ. We saw that when he descended from, Yes, in the episode with Amalekites, when he symbolized the crucifixion, and when he descended from Sinai with the renewed tables of.
And the wood in the water.
Yes, it's the rod that represents crucifixion. Anyway, these small glimpses of this Christ, Moses as Christ, are always found in the sections where the main protagonist is Israel. So
Yes, Israel.
Israel. When it's about Moses, then he represents humans.
I would like to add to this question is why you chose this text to go into, because you started with the three notions of dogmatic, theological interpretation, ascetic, spiritual,
I came to it through the Septuagint because I did the translation of the Exodus for our Slovak series, and that was one thing. So I came into touch with patristic exegesis of this section. And also at the time, I also translated Gregory of Nyssa's Life of Saint Macrina. And I liked it very much. I liked, that was my first work by Gregory that I translated, and I liked it very much. And then I was thinking, what I'm going to do next. And so I chose the Life of Moses. So.
And also, I felt somehow at the start of your lecture that you found this play with female and male symbolism. I also find it very interesting. So maybe you could add something. You added something.
Well, yes, I could add 20 pages about it.
Some pages. Of course, yeah, we could have a separate lecture on this subject.
Yes, actually, I had at the beginning of October. So it's fresh in my memory. Which part of it is of the greatest interest? There was the patriarchal that was applied. Well, that is an interesting thing. The patriarchal symbolism that sees the rational part of the soul as male and the irrational as female. This is, we may call it patriarchal symbolism, is applied sort of internally. The authors took it as their own, and they were comfortable with this symbolism. The other one, the matriarchal, we may notice that it is applied externally. The evil male is the Pharaoh, the devil, which is sort of some shadowy figure. The evil is projected on this figure, and the positive female, that is those midwives who saved children and the Pharaoh's daughter. They represent usually education or the church, and sometimes they also represent the divine wisdom. Anyway, they are external entities again. So we have the patriarchal symbolism that is used internally, and the matriarchal that remains external. And I studied this, I studied many Greek authors from Philo to other church fathers. They more or less conform to this pattern. This is found in all of them. But when we study spiritual development, there is, I think it is generally accepted that if a person projects something externally, they shouldn't do it. They should deal with it on the conscious level and somehow integrate it into their internal world. So I wanted to know whether some of these authors did it, and most of them didn't. There is Philo, one exception, who interpreted the Pharaoh not as a devil outside, but as an arrogant mind. And he's a unique author who does this. So for him, the whole world is more internalized and more to the taste of the 21st century, as we like to see it. The other person who did something of the internalization is our Gregory of Nyssa. And he was able to integrate the female, positive female figure. It is only a shade of meaning, but at the beginning, Gregory speaks about the birth of rationality, that the baby boy is born in our souls. And the baby is born not just as a matter of chance. It must be wanted to be born, and it must be wanted by some female capacity in humans. So there is some motherly capacity in humans that gives birth to this baby boy and takes care of it and brings it to flourishing. And it is a parallel figure to the pharaoh's daughter. Functionally, it is a figure that has a similar function as this pharaoh's daughter. So what Gregory did was practically he internalized the meaning of the positive female that remained outside, and he somehow was able to put it inside the human soul. So these are the two remarkable points of this, the use of this symbolism in antiquity.
I just would now like to hear the whole story in allegorical language. So, because now you told us the whole line of Moses, right? But there is a subtext or supertext.
It is.
And you
I did the commentary.
Has an interesting.
No, continue.
I'll ask my question after.
Which goes with this.
I do the commentary of Gregory's works, of this Gregory. I see my work as a commentary of his work.
And you also wrote it down? Like the kind of allegorical
no
text?
No.
Little text.
I mean, I hope to write a monograph on this one day.
Okay. I'd like to read it.
But if there's no one else, I would also like to ask one question. Can you a bit more elaborate on what Gregory in this text and maybe elsewhere says about the profane sciences? Because that is a monastic issue. And so far, there's always this difficulty between well, scholarship, which is what we do here, among others, and the monastic way, and there are others who will severely reject scholarship and reading because it rather spoils than helps. But he again seems to have kind of a balanced approach.
Exactly.
And he's not the only one, if I'm the Cappadocians, as far as I recall.
Exactly.
But what exactly is his?
The education appears at the beginning of the work. First, the first image of the profane education is the pharaoh's daughter, who practically saves Moses. The education is presenting as life-saving for rationality. That's one thing. Then the second image was the Egyptian the Egyptian man who fought with the Hebrew. That was the second stage when the education became to be ambiguous or downright dangerous, and it had to be somehow eliminated. So the Egyptian was killed. The third stage was in Madian, which again is the image of the education with its water sources that give life, and Moses protected them. So he became somehow the strong one who can protect the education against its abuse. So I think there is this development, 3 stages of development. Then there is an image of he had a foreign wife. She's again an image of education, and she's a helper, just like the elder brother Aaron. There are these 2 helpers that Moses got, and there is another image of the profane education. When I didn't mention it in my lecture, but when the Israelites left Egypt, they spoiled Egypt. They left it with the spoils of Egypt.
Mhm.
They took the golden vessels from their Egyptian neighbors and so on. And it is a bit problematic episode because it cannot be taken literally, because in its literal sense, it's theft. This way or that way, it's theft. So it is interpreted allegorically as taking once again, the spouse of Egypt represent the profane education that can be taken and used for something good. So they took the good stuff of profane education and used it for rebuilding of the tabernacle of God.
So if you wanted to if you would want to summarize that, it would come down to okay, it might be applied, it might be of help, but rather be cautious. Yeah. So it's I still feel a certain prevalence of the monastic ascetic virtue ideal. So you can do it
But
without.
monastic ideal is to eliminate it completely.
What?
Eliminate profane education.
Yeah.
They
What
weren't
about scholarship?
Yeah.
No,
What you talked about scholarship?
no, scholarship and profane education. I treat that as one context, but
Yeah.
so
Yes,
it's,
be cautious.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so okay.
The profane education should have a subordinate place in the life of a Christian. There is also an image that the profane education is represented by the Pharaoh's daughter at the beginning.
Mhm.
But there is also another mother, Moses' birth mother, who represents or may represent the Christian teaching. And Gregory points out that for the child's survival, both of these mothers are necessary, because the Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up, but his birth mother remained there at the background and took care of him at a distance. So
But she stays invisible. Mostly, no?
yeah, but she was taken as his nurse.
Ah,
Well, I didn't mention all of those women that were implicated in thwarting the Pharaoh, but there was the Pharaoh's daughter, there was Moses' sister, there was his mother, there were the midwives, women team. And
That's what women do. I have a question. Helena.
Mhm.
I think this is a burning question that everybody has. So Moses is this great prophet. He's chosen by God and he fulfills the mission. And then he sees the promised land, but he can't go into the promised land.
Yeah.
So what is Gregory's theory on
Gregory's
Why?
theory, Gregory's explanation depends a bit on the triple motivation I mentioned. The motivation for with the compensation for one's efforts. There are several passages in the life of Moses when the hardships on the way are overcome thanks to the vision of the promise that the people received. It is found in several places and it worked. That's why it is important to bear in mind that although Gregory says that the third motivation by love is the best, it is not the only one. The others work as well. Those are good as well. So there is the people of Israel that is presented to be mostly motivated by this promise of future goods, by the promised land, that they will enter the promised land. And so is Moses. There are places when Moses is also motivated by this, but at the end, he realizes that this is not exactly the right thing, and he's presented in Gregory's version that he doesn't long for the earthly promised land anymore. He longs only for God, and that's why he ascends the mountain, and there he dies.
Yeah. So he will be rewarded with the spiritual promised land, this heaven, and yeah, instead of the earthly temporary. Okay.
Okay, I don't know whether you have studied this subject, but what is the relation between Gregory Nyssa and his brother Basil? I think Basil looked a bit down upon him.
What did he?
What is his relationship as his greater brother? I mean, his brother was more a political figure, and he also
Yes.
occupied himself with the literal exploration.
Yes, and he died rather young, and then Gregory took over and continued. The relationship between Basil and Gregory is a funny one, because Basil considered Gregory as quite incompetent. And he wrote him letters that clearly indicate that he didn't have a very high opinion of Gregory as figure in the church.
But he survived, and he was quite famous. Was he?
Yes.
Was he a bishop too, or
He was a bishop in Nyssa.
what did he do to make much of this work? Or
Gregory practically continued in what Basil started, because Basil he died fairly young, and Gregory was his younger brother, and continued the polemic with against Eunomius, the Arianist, and also Basil wrote Hexaemeron, the exposition of the first 6 days of creation, and he didn't manage to write the 7th day. So Gregory wrote the 7th day. And so there are several other works that basically Basil started and Gregory finished. I have a question. Nobody is going to ask me what the angel is doing there.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I thought that in the beginning you said Aaron is considered as part of the angels, which represent
Yes.
the former race.
That's true, but when Moses died, Aaron was already dead, I think. So this is an angel,
Yeah.
and it is a depiction of the death of Moses. I think I gave you the quote from the Bible that's about the death of Moses, that he died and nobody knows his grave.
Yeah.
That's the Septuagint. I think the Hebrew text is nobody saw his grave or something like that. Anyway, it is unclear in both versions. And there were several theories about how it was with with Moses' grave and his burial. So the fact that nobody knows about his grave was explained that he wasn't buried by humans, but he was buried by angels or by God himself. So that's one reason why nobody knows about his grave. Then there was a tradition that Moses didn't die. So there was no grave because he didn't die. And there is a work ascension or assumption of Moses, which speaks about him being taken to heaven. So those were versions in antiquity circulating.
Yeah.
And from where did you take these illustrations?
It's a Menologion of Basileus II, Biblioteca Vaticana in Rome, 10th century. And the first image about the pharaoh's daughter was the left side of this big image.
10th century.
Are there any more questions for Helena?
Well, thank you, online and physical present for joining us today. And we agree that we have a very important, interesting text and interpretation and presentation of the text. So Helena, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if I may say, if you ever write something about male and female or other aspects, and there's quite a richness
Yes,
in this
I
text,
have written.
consider to send it to our journal.
Oh,
Yeah, because I think you consciously left out several things because of the
yeah, of course.
restrictions of time. But once you start elaborating that, you can be sure that you have your audience already. So
Okay, thank you.
send it. Yeah.
There are also compliments in the chat.
Yeah.
Interesting lecture.
Yeah.
In Dutch is written.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. For
Thank you.
this lecture.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah.
And nice and
Thank you all for being here.